Hello and welcome to our webinar, Feminist Reads, Spotlight on Body Positivity. I'm Maggie Reagan, Senior Editor, Books for Youth at Booklist. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we will pass along any other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. Links to today's slides and title lists were included in the reminder email you received from Zoom 1 hour ago. To download them, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the links located there. You can also download these materials at any time by copying the URLs on this screen into your web browser. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Rachel Weiss, School and Library Associate Manager at Penguin Young Readers, Summer Ogata, Senior Marketing Manager, also at Penguin Young Readers, Olivia Abtahi, whose book Perfectly Parvin publishes May 18th, Shelly Anand, whose book Laxmi's Mooch publishes March 2nd, Tyler Fetter, whose book Bodies Are Cool publishes June 1st, and Lisa Fipps, whose book Starfish publishes March 9th. First up, we'll hear from Rachel Weiss and Summer Ogata. Rachel is an associate manager in Penguin Young Readers School and Library Marketing Department. She loves a good feminist rant and almost exclusively listens to podcasts about feminism and true crime, and loves the ones that meld the two topics. Summer is a manager in Penguin Young Readers School and Library Marketing Department. She is an avid watcher of women's sports, especially soccer, and is forever embarrassed by that one time in college that she said she wouldn't call herself a feminist. Rachel and Summer, take it away.
Thanks so much, Maggie. We're so excited that you are all here for this webinar today. We can go to the next slide. All right, so to kick things off, I wanted to call out a special link. You can go to bit.ly/feminist webinar guides, which is in all caps, for this one sheet. Every book shown on here has resources that you can download. All you do is click on the cover and it will take you to a page where it'll have either an author video, a discussion guide, an educator guide, or more. And you can also find these things at penguinclassroom.com. So we wanted to make sure you had that info. Next slide. All right, to kick off the book buzz, I'm going to talk about We Are the Ashes, We Are the Fire, which is Joy McCullough's YA follow-up to Bloodwater Paint, which received tons of starred reviews and was a Morris finalist. Unlike Bloodwater Paint, We Are the Ashes, We Are the Fire is a contemporary novel written primarily in prose, featuring a young writer composing poetry about a medieval lady knight who avenges rape victims. This is a powerful work that delves into rape culture, what it means to find justice, and how one act can not only shatter a young woman's life, but also the lives of her family and those that love her, while also showing what rebuilding yourself and your sense of safety in this world can look like as well. This book demands to be talked about. It has 3 starred reviews, and we have a discussion guide that should hopefully be up on our website later today. Next slide.
And hi, my name is Summer, and and next we have A Phoenix First Must Burn, which was edited by Patrice Caldwell. So this is a paperback edition. You can see the cover of 16 different stories. This is an anthology that has 16 stories of Black girl magic, primarily centering Black women in fantasy, sci-fi, and other speculative worlds. And in Patrice's introduction, she kind of explains why this was important to her to create. And I'm just going to read a bit of the introduction now. She says, "Whenever I went to the children's section of the library to discover more tales, the novels that featured characters who looked like me were more often than not rooted in pain set amid slavery, sharecropping, or segregation. Those narratives are important, yes. But because they were the only ones offered, I started to wonder, where is my fantasy? Where's my future? Why don't Black people exist in speculative worlds?" So this book is part of Patrice's answers to that question and to start that discussion all over again. And of course, she is a huge fan of Octavia Butler, which is where the title of the book is from.
Right, next up is Winterkeep. This is my favorite fantasy series of all time. Like, I have a paperback of Graceling that I found at a little free library in my neighborhood next to my computer as we speak. So I can't tell you how excited I was for the 4th installment of this series, Winterkeep. While all of the Graceling Realm books can be read as standalones, I would highly recommend doing a reread of Bitterblue before diving into this novel. We have a new main character in this one. Her name's Lovisa, and while we also have a lot of time with Bitterblue, Hava, and Gideon, who you might remember from previous books in the series. This installment of the series really dives into politics, capitalism, and the environment, and covers these intense topics so well. And as always, Christian Kishore centers incredibly strong girls, and Lovisa and Bitterblue are no different. They are true badass fantasy heroes. Next.
Next is Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe. This queer romance has a historical setting that is so well drawn out that after reading it, I truly think that if we were in the 50s in San Francisco, I could give you pretty accurate directions around Chinatown. So this book is the Venn diagram intersection of 3 things: the queer community, and specifically lesbians, being Chinese American in this country, and third, what it would be like to grow up with both of those identities in the 1950s. Lily, our main character, is fascinated with space and with the women who work at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, like her aunt. But she's also acutely aware of how, in Lily's case, her being a woman, being Chinese American, and being queer, all of those things will affect how she is able to pursue those dreams. It's important to center not only contemporary fiction with broad intersectionality, but especially historical fiction, because as Melinda Lowe's author note explains, girls like Lily have always existed, but it's much more difficult to find documentation of marginalized women in history. With 7 starred reviews, yes, I did not misspeak, it's 7, incredible. This is a book that people will not be able to stop talking about this year, and I hope you all get a chance to dip into the lovely romance of Lily and Kath, because you won't be able to forget them. And next slide. So Tell Me My Name by Amy Reed is one of those books where I could tell you 3 different elements and you would think I was talking about 3 different books, but actually it's the same book. It has something for everyone. 1, on its surface, this is a gender-swapped retelling of The Great Gatsby. Number 2, this book takes place in an eerily close near future where Manhattan is hidden behind a seawall and wildfire season is year-round. And 3, this is a psychological thriller with a mind-blowing twist. Our main character, Ivy Avila, is our Jay Gatsby. And what's layered onto the story that's really fascinating is with the gender swapping, there's this backstory that Ivy has had to deal with trauma from being a young girl in Hollywood, from small microaggressions to overt harassment, and that becomes the underlying motive behind her Gatsby-like party throwing, because she's always craving ways to be in control. I think with our kind of rediscovering what we all did to Britney Spears, this is another book that kind of focuses on teen starlets in that same way, but with all these other elements as well.
All right, next, we're going to talk about a brand new chapter book series. Secret Spy Society stars 3 young girls as they begin their own spying agency. Along the way, they meet up with famous female spies from history, people like Josephine Baker, Nora Kahn, Sarah Edmonds, and more. There is back matter in each of the books so readers can learn more about the real spies behind the stories. And these are also heavily illustrated. Think the level of the Charlie and Mouse series. And the second book in the Secret Spy Society will be coming out later this fall. Next.
So I feel like I don't really need to say anything about this one. Amanda Gorman, maybe you've heard of her. I certainly hope so. It's not an exaggeration to say that the inaugural Youth Poet Laureate Amanda Gorman absolutely stole the show at the Biden-Harris inauguration this January and has been inspiring poets, teens, and basically every human on this planet ever since. In her spoken word poem, The Hill We Climb, Amanda succinctly empowers all of us to imagine a better version of our country, honor its past without ignoring its brokenness. We're overjoyed and honored to be the publisher of Amanda Gorman, and this is the first of 3 books we have with her this year. This first publishing March 30th, is a beautiful gift edition with just the poem The Hill We Climb, featuring an introduction by Oprah. Later in the fall, we'll have Change Sings, a brand new poem written specifically for young people. It's a picture book and illustrated by Lauren Long. And then we'll also have another book called The Hill We Climb and Other Poems, which will be a poetry collection featuring this inaugural poem as well as many others. And I know there is space on your shelves and in your heart for all three.
All right, next, Stacey Lee is the master of writing historical young women, and in her new novel, Luck of the Titanic is no exception. In this new book, Stacey takes us to, you guessed it, the Titanic. We follow Valora and Jamie Luck, twin British-Chinese acrobats, as they board the Titanic. Well, board might not be the best way to describe it. Jamie is already on board and Val has to stow away because Chinese people aren't allowed into America at the time. Stacey Lee was inspired by the documentary The Six, the untold story of RMS Titanic's Chinese passengers, and she puts her fiercely independent main character Val at its center. Like all of Stacey's heroines, Val has a sly sense of humor and will not take no for an answer. This book is out in May, and we'll have discussion questions to go alongside it closer to pub, but you can always download the other discussion guides to Stacey Lee's novels on our website. Next.
So next we have The Legend of Auntie Poe by Xing-Ying Kaur. This is a graphic novel adventure story, which focuses on a young Chinese-American girl who lives on a logging camp in 1885. Like Anne of Green Gables or the American Girl novels, this book shows an innovative retelling of American history, but with a fun fable within. Auntie Poe is the Paul Bunyan of this story, an elderly Chinese woman with a lot of personality and a heck of a lot of adventures. This book is about growing up, figuring out your place in the world. And also, The Legend of Auntie Poe is about who gets to own a myth, and about immigrant families and communities holding on to rituals and traditions while staking out their own place in America.
All right. Now I wanted to shout out some great paperbacks that if you've been here for any of the other feminist webinars we've done in previous years, you might recognize. So I'm just going to call out a few of these specifically. First, we have Hello Flow, The Guide, Period. This is a nonfiction book dedicated to puberty and explaining it to young girls. It also has amazing illustrations and lots of historical details that I personally never knew, like the changing history of women's body hair. Fighting Words by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley is a timely read, not only because it just received a Newbery honor, but because it deals with child sexual abuse, something that unfortunately affects so many young readers. And The First Rule of Punk is a great intersectional read about a young Mexican-American girl trying to figure out her identity while also learning how to be a punk rocker. Next.
And next, this is a quick shout out to the Rise list, which is a feminist book list that's created by the Social Responsibilities Roundtable of the American Library Association. You should all visit their website. You can actually Google Rise Feminist Books because they wrote a mission statement this year that, when I was looking for this list, brought me to tears. It's truly a beautifully written mission statement. They are also challenging all of us to redefine what makes a book feminist. According to them, books for young readers must move beyond merely spunky and feisty young women, beyond characters and people who fight to protect only themselves without concern for the rights of others. Feminist protagonists, in their minds, should call out and work to eliminate sexism and other systemic prejudices, actively shaping their destinies. They break bonds forced by society as they defy stereotypical expectations and show resilience in the face of societal structures. And we're so proud to have so many books, as you can see here, that made the list this year.
All right. I hope you all know about the She Persisted picture books written by Chelsea Clinton and illustrated by Alexandra Boyger. Now, as an extension of that series, we have chapter books featuring an in-depth biography of each of the women featured in the first She Persisted book, all written by amazing authors of Kid Lit today. You can see the first 5 books in this new line here. There's one coming out every month this year, as well as a second in December, so 13 total in 2021. Each book has illustrations, a list of ways you can persist, and additional resources. Next.
And continuing on the biography front, we have more than just the She Persisted books. For younger readers, we have picture books like I Am Frida Kahlo and Sing With Me, which is about Selena. And we also have board books like Who is Jane Goodall? And we also try to highlight all different types of women, current politicians like AOC and Vice President Harris, and less well-known, but women we should all know, like Juliette Gordon-Low, who started the Girl Scouts, and Maveen Betch, who was a Black opera singer who became an environmentalist and saved American Beach, as you can see pictured here in Saving American Beach.
All right, so now we're going to talk about books we've placed into a couple of different categories. We know that feminism isn't a movement that exists on its own, and we have to strive towards anti-racism, fighting against homophobia, dismantling toxic masculinity, and so much more simultaneously. So to start off, I'm really excited to talk about these books that are perfect for talking about consent. The first two books are picture books because we know that it's never too early to start discussing issues of consent with our readers. Can I Give You a Squish and Don't Hug Doug are both great primers to help kids understand that they need to ask before they touch someone else and take that answer seriously. Then Shout by Laurie Halse Anderson is a YA novel in verse that delves into Laurie's own experience being raped as a young teen and how that has affected her life and how writing Speak and talking to teens about consent has shaped her world. Next.
And as Rachel mentioned, we're talking about all different types of movements that all tie into feminism. So next, anti-racism. The first book we have here, Anti-Racist Baby, is a board book written by Ibram X. Kendi, who is the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist. And this board book is a perfect introduction to what it means to be anti-racist and how even babies can learn the first steps. Jacqueline Woodson is an incredible author who I hope you're all are familiar with, and her memoir in verse, Brown Girl Dreaming, is one you should not miss. And finally, Dig by A.S. King. This is a young adult novel that really explores whiteness, what it means to have a legacy and a history in your family of white supremacy and how you dismantle that. It also was a Prince medalist last year.
All right, and the next three books showcase different LGBTQIA experiences. My Rainbow is based on the real story of Trinity Neal and her mom, Deshauna. Trinity is a transgender girl who is looking for a wig that will really express her personality, and her mom is determined to make that happen. The Ship We Built is a middle grade epistolary novel about a trans boy who learns to stand up for himself, particularly to those people that he loves. And Juliet Takes a Breath is an incredible novel about Juliet discovering her sexuality, coming out, and discovering what the feminist movement means and where LGBTQIA people and people of color fit into it. Next.
And next, feminism, as we all know, is not only for people who identify as women. And so we also have some books about toxic masculinity. These feature boys who are kind of examining that within themselves, how they can be better people to the women in their lives, and also how they can dismantle toxic masculinity. What Lane is a middle grade book, and Patron Saints of Nothing is a little bit older as a YA book. And immigration, we have When Stars Are Scattered, which is a graphic novel written by Victoria Jameson with Omar Mohammed, who was a refugee who lived in a refugee camp in Dadaab, Kenya. And We Are Not From Here, which is a young adult book about 3 teens who moved from Guatemala and tried to make it to the United States. And in all of these books, and specifically in When Stars Are Scattered and We Are Not From Here, you can see how being a woman in those situations also affects your experience, especially in immigration.
All right, the last books I'm going to talk about before we pass things over to our lovely author panel is the Pocket Change Collective series. All of the books featured here are out now with the exception of Skate for Your Life and Continuum, which will both be coming out on June 1st of this year. This series is written by leading young activists and covers so many topics, including people of color in the arts, what it means to live outside of the gender binary, being disabled in the world, how we can deal with the climate crisis and how the climate crisis is affecting people of color, and so much more. This is a series that you will not want to miss. And that's all for me and Summer. So over to you, Maggie.
Thank you so much, Rachel and Summer. Those all look so great. Next up, we're going to hear briefly from each of today's authors before we start our panel. First up, we have Olivia Abtahi. Olivia is a writer and filmmaker born in Washington, D.C. When she isn't drafting novels about awkward teens, you can find her working on documentaries about social justice and climate equity. She is currently living in Denver, Colorado with her husband and daughter. According to Olivia's senior year bassoon teacher, she was the worst first-year bassoonist in Northern Virginia. Take it away, Olivia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this panel. I'm so excited to talk to y'all. A little bit about Perfectly Parvin. Parvin Mohammadi has just been dumped only days after receiving official girlfriend status. Not only is she heartbroken, she's humiliated. Enter high school heartthrob Maddie Fumero, who just might be the smoking hot cure to all her boy problems. If Parvin can get Maddie to ask her at homecoming, she's positive it will prove to herself and her ex that she's girlfriend material after all. There's just one problem. Maddie is definitely too cool for bassoon playing, frizzy-haired, Cheeto-eating Parvin. Since being herself hasn't worked for her in the past, see aforementioned dumping, she decides to start acting like the women in her favorite rom-coms. Those women aren't loud, they certainly don't cackle when they laugh, and they smile much more than they talk. But Parvin discovers that being a rom-com dream girl is much harder than it looks. Also hard, the parent-mandated Farsi lessons, a confusing friendship with a boy who's definitely not supposed to like her, and hardest of all, the ramifications of the Muslim ban on her family in Iran. Suddenly, being herself has never been more important. Like Parvin, I am half Iranian. I'm also half Argentinian, though Parvin's just half Iranian and half white. And I also was a terrible bassoonist like her in the book. But through the book, Parvin struggles a lot with her changing body, especially because she has a white mom who doesn't really understand the changes that Parvin's going through. So I'm so excited to talk more about body positivity and how Parvin's body positivity journey goes throughout the book.
Great, thank you so much, Olivia. I'm excited to get started. Next up is Shelly Anand. A debut picture book author, Shelly is a human and civil rights attorney in Atlanta fighting for immigrants and low-income workers from marginalized communities. She received her BA from Wellesley College and her JD from the University of North Carolina School of Law at Chapel Hill. She lives with her husband and 2 small children. Welcome, Shelly.
Thanks, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. This is my first published book, a debut picture book. It's called Laxmi's Mooch. Mooch in Hindi and Urdu means mustache. And it's very much based on my childhood growing up in the States and being a hairy girl and kind of what that experience was like for me, but what I wish it had been like for me. It's about a little Indian American girl named Laxmi, and she's playing on the playground with her friends, and they playfully let her know that she has a mustache, and she kind of goes on this self-exploration journey along with her family, and comes out, being proud rather than ashamed of her much. And so this was very much inspired by my experiences growing up as a South Asian girl in the South. I wrote this book when I was on maternity leave with my daughter, Uma, and she's hairy like my family, the folks in my family. And we had a family friend whose young daughter had gotten teased at school about being hairy, and she was only in kindergarten. And so I was inspired to write a book for young kids about body hair, for young girls about body hair, that it's normal to have body hair. It's not something to be ashamed of, and you don't have to wax it or bleach it or any of the awful things I had to go through. So I'm really excited to be here with these fabulous authors to talk about body positivity and body hair positivity.
I'm really excited to talk more in a second. Next up, we have Tyler. Tyler Fetter is a full-time illustrator based in Chicago and is the author-illustrator of the graphic memoir Dancing at the Pity Party. She graduated from Northwestern University with a BA in radio, film, and TV, and a certificate in creative writing for the media. She further honed her comedic skills at the Second City Training Center, where she graduated from the writing program. In 2012, Tyler began posting her artwork online, and within 5 years, she had grown her illustration company, Roaring Softly, into a recognizable brand with a mix of witty pop culture and intersectional feminist pieces. She has illustrated for Netflix, Comedy Central, and ESPN, and is the illustrator of Christian Conger and Carolyn Irvin's Unladylike. Tyler, take it away.
Hi, everyone. My book is called Bodies Are Cool, and it is a body positive picture book for preschoolers. It's a celebration of the diversity in our bodies. The text is really sing-songy, so even if the preschoolers are a little bit too little to read yet, they can still learn it kind of like a song and chant it with their families. And the book is filled with illustrations of lots and lots of different kinds of bodies, of all different shapes, sizes, colors, abilities, genders, ages, all sorts of things. My goal is to get in there right before little kids start getting bombarded with messages about what their bodies should be like, and remind them that their body is cool just the way it is, and so are everyone else's bodies. I have a lot of memories of when I was a little kid and like looking at my grandma's like wobbly arm and just thinking it was beautiful and soft. And little kids have such a sense of wonder like that, and I really want to like preserve that feeling. I think if everyone was able to stay in that kind of mindset as they got older, the world would be a much happier place. So, and also hopefully the grown-ups that are reading the books with the kids will start to develop that sense as well. So really looking forward to talking to everybody about body positivity, and thanks so much, guys.
Thank you so much for being with us here today, Tyler. And last but not least, we will hear from Lisa Fipps. Lisa is a library marketing manager, and Starfish is her debut novel. She lives in Kokomo, Indiana. Lisa, the floor is yours.
Well, hello. I'm also a former journalist. I can't remember if you just said that or not, but so I look forward to always talking to people. That's what I did for a living for a long time. My book, like you said, is Starfish, which I wish I could reverse it. Like if I just did that, you could see how it looks. But anyway, it comes out on March 9th, and the protagonist in it is named Ellie, and she is fat, and she is bullied relentlessly for being fat. And so this book is her journey from learning that there's nothing wrong with her, there's something wrong with people who are cruel. And it teaches kids to starfish, which means take up your space in the world and when the world tries to make you feel small. And so it's written in free verse, and it's a middle grade novel. And I think that's it for me now.
Thank you so much, Lisa. We're excited to have you here. Well, now that you've each had a chance to tell us a little bit more about yourselves and your books, we are going to switch over to panel mode for the group discussion. So you can all go ahead and unmute yourselves and enable your videos. I will do that too. Hi. And we will begin. So I have a few questions for each of you individually just to kick things off, and then we are going to segue into sort of more of a group conversation, which we would be doing if we were all together right now. Remember that? So Lisa, since we just spoke to you, I think we're going to kick off with a question for you, if that works for you.
Sure.
Yeah, but I just want to say Starfish can be a really painful book to read at times. It's just really raw, and Ellie's voice is so raw and real. But I think one of the most rewarding and cathartic storylines is Ellie's developing relationship with her therapist. And since therapy still isn't something that's normalized, in a lot of books for young readers or for a lot of people, I think. I was hoping you could speak a little bit to your decision to include this plotline, this element of the book.
Sure. I included therapy in this for several reasons. One of which is that there's such a stigma when it comes to mental illness. And not that Ellie is mentally ill, she is not. But there's this stigma about mental illness, but also just getting help for dealing with a variety of emotions. And there shouldn't be, because if you fall and break your ankle, it only makes sense to seek help to get healing and to feel better and to be able to function normally. Why don't we do that with our brains? You know, our brains control everything else. It makes more sense to do that. And also in the book, her dad is a psychiatrist, but he sees the pain in her eyes and he wants to help her. But I want kids to know parents don't always have the answers. And, you know, that's okay. It's all right. And the other thing is kids don't always talk to their parents and tell them what's going on. I mean, I was bullied relentlessly for being a fat kid. I never went home and said, Mom, you know, I never did that. And so kids need to know that they have options as to who they talk to about what's going on with them. And they also need to know that when the bullying is at home, which unfortunately that is way too common. And it's a situation where Ellie finds herself in. One of her biggest bullies is her mother. And you're definitely not going to open up to your family or your parents when you are being bullied by them. So this gives them that option as well, that, you know, you can seek safety outside your family unit. And so those are the several reasons that I chose to highlight therapy and how it can help. But the most important thing I think that that comes through in some of the poetry is that when you bury systemic like hatred for a long time, when you go to deal with it, it's going to be messy. And it helps to have someone who really knows what they're doing to help you process that.
Thank you so much. Olivia, for your kind of intro, I wanted to touch on something that you mentioned in your introduction of the book. And that's Parvin is such an incredibly relatable character. She's so much fun to read about. But then one thing that did stick out to me is something that you mentioned, which is that she's kind of internalized certain prejudices. At one point in the story, I think she's trying so hard to be something that she's not, which is when somebody does actually like her for who she really is, she kind of starts to wonder what's wrong with them. So I'm curious to hear more about how you developed her character.
Yeah, great question. I believe it was like Groucho Marx who said, I would never want to join a club that would accept me as a member. And I think when you're that age, you're kind of in middle school, beginning high school, you're just really uncomfortable in your body. And I think for Parvin, it's even harder because she has a mom who doesn't look like her. That's an age when your body's changing a lot and her mother just doesn't know how to kind of help her through these changes. And that's something that I dealt with growing up as well. And I think for Parvin, it was just really, it was just really hard for her to come to terms with who she is. Not only is she hairy, she's darker, she has frizzy hair, you know, as opposed to her mom's straight blonde hair, and a mom who's like never had to wax a day in her life and like draws her eyebrows in. Parvin was just really struggling with self-acceptance, and who can blame her when she looks on TV or at the movies or opens a magazine? There's nobody who looks like her. So for Parvin, yeah, she is almost like suspicious of people who find her like attractive or like her for who she is, because not only does Parvin have body issues, she's also loud and she's funny and she's really outspoken, and that's something that you don't see a lot of either. You see, I mean, I'm not sure what other people's ages are, but when I was coming of age, there was this thing called the manic pixie dream girl, which is this quiet girl who doesn't talk a lot, but she's like super interesting. She's also like incredibly thin for some reason. They just all are. She doesn't talk a lot. She doesn't crack jokes. She's not sassy. And I think that's something that Parvin has internalized, right? It's all of these heroines in movies. They don't really talk a lot. So for Parvin, yeah, it's a story of self-acceptance and also realizing that, like, hey, if someone has a crush on me, that should feel good. It shouldn't make me feel suspicious and doubtful. I should also, if anything, be crushing on myself.
Shelly, I want to talk about just kind of the trajectory of your book, because it begins in such a place of insecurity, but it quickly kind of transforms into this very triumphant, confident story. So I don't know if that was always what you had in mind. And then also just kind of want to mention that when it's about body hair, which is something that's still so stigmatized in a lot of Western society. So I want to know if that's something that you always felt confident about, or if that is something that you have to kind of work on celebrating.
Oh, I definitely have not always felt confident about it at all. And it's not just Western society, South Asian culture. My parents are immigrants from India. Like, hair removal is like a big deal. But like I said, the inspiration for the book came when a friend of mine who's Pakistani, her daughter was in kindergarten and she came home crying. And I was like, gosh, that is so young. I remember being teased. I was teased about having a mustache, maybe in like 5th or 6th grade when I was a tween, but 6 is pretty young. And my friend was like, what am I going to do? I'm not going to go take her to the parlor and get it threaded or waxed. And so I knew I wanted to write something where hair removal wasn't the answer, because it doesn't have to be the answer. And I think so many times, just growing up, it's either your parent or your mom lets you go and get threading, or lets you shave your legs, or lets you wax your arms, or you have to wait until you're old enough to do it. And so I wanted to create a world where you also don't have to do it, and it's fine and beautiful to have a mustache, and that it's normal, and just normalizing body hair for kids, and recognizing that it's not just brown people that have body hair. Like, white folks have body hair too. It's just blonde or lighter. And it's been a very interesting experience because, there's a lot of trauma associated with hair removal. My mother was an immigrant. She didn't want me to get bullied in school. She's a doctor, but she would put bleach on my face. And, I think she was just doing the best she could at the time. I don't blame her for it. But, I have 2 kids, and I want them to have choice and autonomy over their body. And, hair removal is painful. Hair removal is expensive. And hair removal, it can be dangerous. Like, if you're putting chemicals, and I think before we went live, we were talking about Nair and how the smell of Nair is so traumatizing to us. And it really is. And, hairlessness, coming from a society that was colonized by the West, hairlessness was seen as being beautiful. If you're hairy, you are unclean, unkempt. And it goes hand in hand with, different forms of, racism or colorism or shadeism. Like, you are considered unkempt or unbeautiful if you're not fair, if you're not hairless. And like, this myth of the hairless woman just needs to go away. We're all living in the pandemic. We're letting our armpit hair grow out, letting our leg hair grow out. Let's just be who we want to be. And that's what I want for my kids. And for all those hairy kids out there, I want them to have the tools, via a story, to be proud and love themselves, and not feel like they have to change themselves in these ways.
Tyler, I wanted to wrap up this individual section with you, because just all the level of detail in the illustrations for your book is really astounding, and it offers this true feeling of a community. So I'm just curious to know how you began just approaching the layout for this book, and were there any outside resources or references you referred to put it together?
Yeah, so the way that I started was I put out a question on Instagram, and I asked my followers if there were any physical features that they wish that they had learned to love when they were little. And I got more comments than I've gotten on anything I've ever posted. And I've been like an internet leaning artist for many years. So I could tell it's like, this is like a deep thing. And I still get messages even though I already finished the book. So my goal was to try to fit like as many qualities as I could into the book. And I'm certain that I left some out. But I went through all my Instagram comments and I wrote down every single feature someone mentioned, and I like organized them in a spreadsheet. And then I made another spreadsheet where I was trying to combine like skin color, hair type, like ability and everything, so that there were as many like different combinations as possible in the book, because I didn't want it to be like every person who's disabled is white or something. That's not how it really is. And when I finished the book, I went through it with a race sensitivity reader and a disability sensitivity reader and a trans sensitivity reader, and got their like lived experience help, and just trying to make it as diverse and as friendly as it possibly be. And hopefully, even if there are people that don't see like their specific trait or combination of traits in the book, they'll understand that they're included in the general message of the whole thing.
Well, I'd love to open the discussion to the whole panel now. I know it can be a little weird on Zoom to kind of know when to talk, but we'll figure it out. And if we need prompting, we'll work with it. But I just want to start by saying, even a few years ago, I think the conversation surrounding bodies had it kind of, unintentionally, but kind of a more toxic positive slant. I think a lot of people really were pushing for a, like, despite our differences, we're all the same inside message. And now, obviously, there's still a lot of work to be done, but I think we're seeing kind of a trend towards celebrating variety. I would say even like a few years ago, you really wouldn't have seen a book like Tyler's or a picture book like Shelly's. So can you all maybe comment on some ways you've seen the conversation develop and maybe some directions you want to see it go?
I'll start. I always like to go first. People at work make fun of me because I'm like, I want to go first, just because that way I otherwise the anxiety builds for me. I think of it as like a garden, right? If you want to plant a garden where there's never been a garden, you got to get rid of a bunch of crap, and then you've got to, dig and plant and weed and water before you have this flourishing garden, right? And I think that, the toxic positive slant, wasn't the best way maybe to approach the subject. But to me, I kind of look at it as that was clearing away the junk, right? So we could get down to business and get going on it. And I think that we're on our way. And I think this movement toward, celebrating it is evidence that garden's starting to grow, that we're starting to flourish. We're starting to see the seeds that were planted a long time ago by the, toxic positivity, when it got started. And so I see it as a good trend. And I think I'm so excited because, the reason I wrote Starfish was because that book was not on the shelves when I needed it as a kid. And now I look at Tyler's and Shelly's and Olivia's books. I'm like, look at who we're reaching, So I think this celebratory phase that we're in is amazing. And I can't wait to see, like, where do we go from here? We go from, first having like this toxic positive to celebrating. And I just want to get to where it doesn't surprise us anymore. That's kind of my goal. Why should we be surprised that people are fat? Why should we be surprised that people are hairy? And why is it bad? So that's kind of like my, where I'm looking toward, but that's how I see it. And it's funny that I would mention gardening because I kill all living plants. So, but the analogy is strong. The analogy is strong.
I remember that there used to be those ads for Dove that were like this new frontier of like showing real bodies, even though it was like such a small range of real bodies. Also, everybody's a real body. But it was like, here are all these women in their underwear and they're all great, but also here's a lotion that helps with your cellulite. And it's like a real mixed message. It's like an attempt was made, but they didn't really follow through, right? So I'm happy to see that things are shifting. It's slow, but we're generally moving in a direction of like, here's a wider variety of people and like, here are clothes that fit their bodies just the way they are. They don't have to limit themselves or change. Yeah.
I think for me, I think being a parent has really had an impact on me and kind of the values I want to pass down to my kids, and unlearning a lot of the harmful stuff that I kind of inherited from, majority culture, but also within my own family, which, includes, fat phobia and shadeism and colorism. And I think, with respect to body positivity, I mean, 2 books have really had a huge impact on me. One is The Body is Not an Apology by Sonia Renee Taylor, who's, this amazing radical Black feminist who writes about how, children, kind of what Tyler was talking about, when you're little, you have this sense of like joy and wonder about your body and curiosity about it. And it's so, so beautiful. I'm watching that right now with both of my kids that are 3 and 6. And then slowly it kind of erodes away because of majority culture, magazines, TV, all of that, your parents' own insecurities. And I think, similarly, being a feminist, being an intersectional feminist, wanting my kids to be, committed to anti-racism and wanting them to be, good members of society and good friends means, teaching them that, hey, like your mom is hairy and, people are fat, and being fat is not a bad thing. It is not a pejorative thing. There are fat people that are very athletic and run and do yoga and do all the things we can do and are strong. And I think it's kind of for adults, us unlearning, and in the process of unlearning, teaching those lessons and putting them into a story or a book form. And I think that, at least for me and, authors like the folks here on this panel, I think we're all kind of wanting to look back and say, what do I wish I had done, or what do I want for the future? And I think that's kind of where it comes from, at least for me as an author.
Yeah, just piggybacking off of what Tyler mentioned about like the Dove campaign. I remember like Glossier had a campaign for like a body wash where they featured like fat women, right? And they were proportionally fat, like Ashley Graham fat, like, okay, like still like, the thin fat, it wasn't like super groundbreaking, but they were like, these women are so strong. They're so brave. Like they're showing their bodies in public, like, whoa, like, and I just remember thinking like, dude, that is not it. Or like Mindy Kaling will talk about how people will be like, oh, you're so brave for wearing a dress that shows your arms. And she's like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm just being in my body. So I think that like toxic positivity movement has definitely like made a splash. And I'm like Lisa, like, I'm glad it's at least like starting the conversation as we like, dig away that rubble on top. But yeah, I know at least in my book, not just with hairiness, something that Parvin really struggled with was just accepting that somebody, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, when I started editing this book, my editor kept being like, Olivia, why doesn't Parvin like this cute guy in her Iranian class who likes her? Like, I don't understand the issue. He's cute, he likes her, she thinks he's cute. Like, why can't they be together? And it wasn't until like the third and like final edit, like before it's like going off to copy, like arcs were like around the corner, that I like finally tapped into the fact that like she doesn't like him because he looks like her. And that was something that I could only get to because I would see ads like from razor companies like Billy, or I would follow accounts like Alok Vaid Menon, one of his books you just showed, you know, incredible trans writer. And the body positivity movement has shifted so much that in the time that I started my book to like when I finished it, that like I could finally articulate why she was feeling the way she was. So it's definitely evolving. There's so much more room for growth. Like we have such a long way to go, but yeah, like just piggybacking off of what everyone else has said, like we've made a lot of progress. And the fact that we are even talking about it now, like we didn't even say mustache back then. We would say like hair on our upper lip, right? Like we couldn't even say mustache. So I'm just so excited that we've gotten to this point now and have started this conversation.
Shelly, I wanted to circle around back to something you started to say about parenthood, just because I think a lot of people attending this webinar right now are adults, obviously people who work with children and people who are adults who are influencing and play a key role in kids' lives and educations. And I mean, parents play a key role in a lot of these books. And then Shelly, in your book, Laxmi's parents are really critical in her success. Whereas in Olivia's book, you know, her Parvin's mom is sort of unintentionally contributes to some of her issues. And then in Lisa, in your book, Ellie's mom is kind of a lot more unintentionally, but still a lot more directly causing her harm. So I'm wondering if you can all sort of speak on the responsibility you think that adults have towards the young people in their lives when they're going through these transitional periods, and the way that you just as adults who in one way or another influence children's lives, how you think you can, you know, help them, guide them through these periods.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that's very important to me as a mother, as an auntie, you know, as an adult in my community, and you know, as a mother. And I think Laxmi's mom, you know, I think I said this, but before we went online, but she's definitely much more like self-actualized and confident than I am. You know, I was really struggling with how to write the mom, because so many of our mothers and in the Desi, you know, South Asian community, they are like, yeah, let's go ahead and remove that hair when you're old enough. Like there were two camps of moms, like you're way too young, stay a little kid. And then there were moms like my mom who, you know, even on my wedding, 10 years ago, I got married and I have a lot of arm hair. And she's like, you need to get your arm hair waxed before you get mehndi, before you get henna on. And I was like, no, like, I don't want to wax my arms. And she's like, it's going to look awful if you don't. And so I was like, okay, this is the last time I'm ever waxing my arms in my whole life. And I haven't waxed them again in 10 years. I do think, you know, our parent, you know, my goal as a parent, as an adult, as a mother is to not, like I said, pass down the stuff that I think is unhealthy and has contributed to misery. You know, like I try not to be critical of myself and my body in front of my children. That's something that's really important to me. And it helps me, you know, like me learning to practice self-love is for my children, but it's also for myself. And so it benefits both of us. And I think it also invites vulnerability, because then when my kids are feeling a certain way about, you know, my son's losing his teeth and he's like, I look really silly. And I'm like, you look beautiful. You look amazing. You look like a 6-year-old. Like you're never going to have a time in your life and, you know, until you're an old man, when your front teeth are missing, you look amazing. And, you know, creating a safe space for him and for my daughter to be who they want to be and to have their bodies. And, you know, I definitely grew up in a fat phobic household, and, you know, being, you know, twice postpartum, you know, I gave away all my clothes from when I was, you know, prenatal. And, you know, I've had to do this journey for myself and also do it for my kids.
I'll jump in. It's like, I wish I could see, like, we should hold up signals, like I'm going, but I think it's because I did research just to make sure, because Starfish is based a lot on what happened to me, and everything that happened to Ellie didn't happen to me, but a version of it did. And so, but I wanted to do some research and make sure that what I was saying was like the common experience for a fat kid growing up. And boy, yes, it was, unfortunately. And I mean, it was a matter of what do you leave on the cutting room floor, because there was so much material to choose from. But I think that one of the things that kind of bothered me when I was looking at this was the research that I found that kids as young as 3 and 4 start wanting to diet and change their bodies. And you're not, like you said, you're not born that way. Kids are fascinated. I love why Tyler loved her grandma's big arms. I mean, kids are fascinated by bodies and body functions. And somewhere along the way, adults, whether it's at home or in schools or on TV or whatever, are sending these messages that that's not good, that hair is not good, that fat's not good, that all of this is bad. And, I think that's why it's so important that these books are out there, and that they need to know that it's not just, I mean, parents and adults have a responsibility. And, and I could have not tackled this subject because, it wasn't really fun to write about, to be reminded of my past all the time. But, there's a responsibility that we have as a society to kids so that they don't grow up with all of this self-hatred and hating other people. I think if there's anything right now, there's this sense of, God, please, can we just stop all this hatred? It's just coming at us from all angles. And it's like, why? Why? There's no reason for it. So that's kind of how I look at it, is that there's a responsibility that we have. Once I mean, like, I could be quiet for the rest of my life and not share things that I went through. But, just I think of Laura Hulse, Anderson with Speak. I mean, I'm sure that is not pleasant for her. Content warning here, but, when you're sexually abused or assaulted, it's not pleasant to talk about that. And she's based her career on talking about that, among other subjects, but that's one of the big ones. And so, a lot of times it's painful, but we use it so that we can stop the pain. And I think that's important.
Something that I wanted to point out is that a lot of people think that body positivity falls on the mother if you're a daughter, and a father if you're a son. And something that I loved is that in both Lisa and mine's book, the dads really go to bat for their daughters. And there's kind of cross-gender, just support that I think is hopefully gaining traction, but was kind of rare when I was growing up. And I just loved Ellie's dad in Lisa's book. And as someone who recently became a mother, I have a 5-month-old. I feel the same way Shelly does. I never want my daughter to feel ugly in the ways I felt growing up. And unknowingly, my mom would pass her own body insecurities onto me, or, she's a woman raising a daughter in a new country that doesn't look anything like her. Of course, she's going to try to make me look like magazines and TV shows, because that's the only instruction manual that she has. And the poet Khalil Gibran once said that children are not born from you, but through you. And since becoming a mom, it has just become so clear that I am a steward of this little life. This little life is not a mirror. This daughter is not someone that I can put my own issues onto. She is never supposed to look like me unless she wants to. And it is really just my job to make her the best version of herself, if that's even the gender that she wants to be. Those might not even be her pronouns later, that she can be. And I think that's something that I hope parents today like take away from these books and all these different experiences is that, yeah, there's a chance that your kid might not look like you. Like my daughter definitely, like everyone thinks I'm the nanny. It's super fun. But you know, like that's no reason why you need to mold them in your image. And I am so excited for maybe not the body positivity movement, as we're calling the toxic positivity of it, but like maybe just like the movement of parents like letting their kids be kids and not having hangups, and just being so excited for their journey into like becoming, I don't know, these just wonderful little human beings. Because I don't know, when I was little, I would think that if I would see an alien, like an ET, and I'd be like, wow, what if in their culture, like the ridges on ET's eyes are like super offensive, like unshaved armpits? I'd be like, what if in that culture, like those are really offensive, or like, you know, his eyes are symmetrical. Maybe in his culture, like that's gross. I think there was a Twilight episode on this too, of a woman getting like a pig snout removed because only people with pig snouts were beautiful. And I just try to like bring that outside of my own experiences and say, okay, is this normal? This is just a cultural and societal thing. It's something I was raised with. So it's just, that's the kind of baggage that I don't ever want to put onto the next generation. And I hope other adults and parents don't either.
I'm not a mother. Hopefully I will be one day, but I will say that like all of this is not just about feeling good about your own body, but I think like the way that we learn about bodies can also really affect the way that we interact with other people. So like, of course, it's good to have a positive body image, and that's what we're aiming for here. But I think like hearing negativity about bodies makes it easier to judge strangers for the way that they look or for the way they move. And that can, you know, as these kids get older, that spirals into like lack of accommodations in public spaces. So I think like starting young and getting people to feel positive about their own body, but also about other people's bodies that are really different from their own. I think that's like the direction that we want to be moving in.
Well, it does unfortunately look like we are running out of time here. So I think we're gonna have to wrap this up. But I just want to close by saying it was really exciting to read all of these books, and really kind of just a joyful experience, because I think there was just such a through line in all of them of seeing characters and people who were really just starting to claim their space, which has been such a wonderful thing to see in children's literature lately. I'm sure characters, I mean, Tyler's book is just such like an explosion of people taking up space, which is great to read. And the rest of you had characters who were just taking these journeys where they were learning to be unafraid to be just loud or bold or confrontational. So it was just a great experience reading them all in a row. Highly recommend them to all of our panelists. So thank you all and by panelists, I meant attendees, obviously. So today's great for me, but thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. It was such a pleasure speaking with you. And we'll wrap this up. If you were an attendee and you had a question, they will be sent out to all of our panelists, so you will have a chance to receive an answer in the next couple of days. From here, everyone, you are all free to disable your videos and mute back up. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar and this conversation.
Thank you.
It's been such a pleasure speaking with you all.
Thank you for having us. This was a lot of fun. I hope we all stay in touch and keep the conversation going.
Tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's slide presentation, title list, certificate of completion, and video recording. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit www.booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones, like those you see here. If you haven't already, be sure to check out Booklist Reader, where Booklist contributors post about all things books and library land. Not yet a subscriber? Pair the page-by-page reading experience of print with the convenience of online access at booklist.online.com and lock in print, online, digital, and archive access by taking advantage of the special webinar offer to get Booklist for only $75. While you're perusing Booklist online, be sure to check out Book Links, a quarterly supplement to Booklist, perfect for educators and school librarians. It is now freely available to all. To start reading, type booklinks.booklistonline.com into your web browser. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, and one more thank you to our sponsor, Penguin Young Readers, and to all today's amazing panelists. This concludes today's webinar.